Excuse me. Good morning, and thank you for joining me once again for live stream journaling. I'm Eric Scott, and I'd love to know who's out there tuning in. So if you want to pop into the comments and say hi, I'd greatly appreciate that. And like always, if you want to mention where you're tuning in from, that's always awesome to see where people are coming from. Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. Not really sure if this is streaming now. All right. So if you can hear me, why don't you go ahead and just let me know, because I'm not sure if this is streaming. It seems to be stuck on a screen. Oh, okay. Just wanted to make sure that it was working, because there's a lag between what I'm seeing on the screen. So hopefully it is recording. So anyway, so I'm going to focus today on colored pencil. Now, colored pencil is not something I use all the time in the journal. It is something that I like to use occasionally, and I use it a lot more for like sort of finishing stuff, but I think what it is that it's just not the material that I carry around with me all the time. It's something that I carry, or that I use more in the studio, just because I feel like I've got enough stuff that kind of goes with me pretty much everywhere. So yeah, so I wanted to just kind of show you some of that, because I know colored pencils are something that a lot of folks have, especially some people are into coloring books and coloring pages, and you might have a nice set of colored pencils. And any kind of colored pencil will work for this, even inexpensive ones. But you do kind of get what you pay for, like most art materials. So the less expensive brands aren't going to give you as rich or vibrant color as typical, so as some of the other brands. So yeah, so I'm using a Derwent Color Soft colored pencil. So let me go ahead and switch it over. All right, so I've got my journal, of course, that I'll be working in. I've got my colored pencils, and like I said, these are the Derwent Color Soft. Derwent makes some different brands. This is different kinds. This is a fairly good brand. It's pretty soft. It's very intense. I like them a lot. A lot of people use Prismacolor. Prismacolor is one of the premium brands. And then there are Faber-Castell makes their polychrome pencils, which are really nice. But really any kind of colored pencil will work. And I've got some other stuff. I've got some of my Punchinella and my mesh and this weird little circle thingy. And then I've got a spare piece of paper just because I want to demonstrate on it, because sometimes it's hard to tell with all the other stuff that's on a page. And then I have another little book because I want a hard surface, and that's going to be really important with our colored pencil. So anyway, I mean, colored pencils, I have a set of 36 here. And like I said, any kind of would really do. And you can use them to color, and that's probably how most people do. Like, oh, I have a shape. Like if I'm flipping through, I might go, oh, I'm going to color in these little rectangles. So I'm not going to really worry about that, but I do want to show a couple other techniques that I use. And what I like to do is to use this kind of stuff. And what I'm going to do, so this is my Punchinella. I've used this for lots of different things. Used it with watercolor pencil, ink. Now I'm going to use it with colored pencil. I could trace it. That's one way, but I'm going to do a texture rubbing. And I remembered this technique because somebody mentioned it last week, I think, in our little virtual meetup. And that's what the extra book is for, because I want to do this actually I'm going to put the punchinella underneath. I'm going to do the texture rubbing over here. And what I want is a hard surface, because I have all these pages in here and I want to have a hard surface underneath it. So if I take my other book and open it up and lay it there, then I have a hard surface. I don't have to use a book. I can use a little piece of wood or a real hard piece of cardboard, but something that's not super soft, because I want to have a lot of stiffness underneath the punchinella. Okay, and then if I take my pencil, let's see, which color was I thinking about using? I think I was going to use the green. All right, so I've got a light green here. It's called light green. And when I do this, when I do a texture rubbing, I really want to use the side of the tip. So I'm going to hold it so that the pencil is actually underneath my hand. So it's kind of in the palm of my hand, and then I'm going to really use the side of this. Some people have colored pencils, not colored pencil sticks, but color sticks. Crayola makes them, Prismacolor makes them. They're called art sticks. But if I use the side of it, and if I really press hard, and this is why I have that book underneath, because I can press hard and it will be darker on top of the punchinella, and where the holes are, it's going to be lighter. And so you may have done this, especially as kids. We do this a lot. We do crayon rubbings. So this is the same idea, but instead of doing it with crayon, I do it with a colored pencil. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing this. Like I said, you want to have that hard surface underneath it. That's just going to make it work better. But even if you don't have a hard surface underneath it, it'll still work, but it might not be so much contrast. I really like, I hope you can really see that's darker there. So I can just kind of rub it, do some texture on it. But like I said, you want to have that hard surface underneath. The other thing is that you don't want to have anything on the other side of the paper. So if I were doing this and there was like collage on the other side, it wouldn't really work. And the other issue is thick paper. So if you have a very thick watercolor paper or mixed media paper, it's not going to work. This is mixed media paper, but it's not super thick, so it works pretty well. So I could do that. The other thing I could do is, what if I move it a little bit and then take a different color? This time I have a darker green, and then I could do the same thing. Now this just kind of go right on top, and so I can kind of layer too and get some different effects with it. And by moving it, I get, they're offset a little bit and get more of a texture. So, but anyway, that kind of is a nice way to start a page. And I did it purposefully on this white paper so that it would really show up. But you could do it pretty much anywhere. But if there's not a lot going on the paper already, it's going to be easier to see. So I did it there, and then I did it. Let's see. Did it right here. So I used my circle one underneath. Now I didn't have a hard surface underneath, and so I think that's why that didn't show up as well. But if I would have put a hard surface underneath, that just really helps push the mesh into the paper. So texture rubbings are a perfect way of doing or adding colored pencil to your book. Okay. Another thing that I think about is I do color in areas, but what I like to do is use the white. Okay. So if I have an area where I want it to stand out, so I'm going to flip back here to one of my pages that I did earlier and did some. Here we go. So when I look at this page here, I am becoming. Now, when I talked about embellishment, I talked about going around it with the watercolor pencil to make it like more of a shadow to make it stand out. But maybe I want the letters to stand out more. Okay, and I did that here on this front page. So the words in the process of, I use the white, and it's kind of subtle, but it just makes it pop out a little bit. And I'm going to leave that. I'm going to maybe come back to that later. There is a spot. So the one day did the word, if I can remember where I had it. I think it was back here. That's the problem, is sometimes it's like, oh, I know I want to do this on this certain page, but then because I jump around a lot, it's like, oh, well, which page was that? It was the word awaken. And I know it's around here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So it's on this page where I've done the brain, and so I have the word awaken here, and I thought about using a white gel pen to go around to like really make that a solid white, but I think what I want to do is to take the white colored pencil. Now, I don't even know if you're going to be able to see this, but I take the white, and the white, the Derwent is a real quality pencil. And so I could probably take this white and draw on top of a black drawing paper or construction paper, and it will really show up. But because of the mixed media that's down, this white isn't super opaque, which that's why I kind of like it. And it's a little bit more subtle. And you might even be like watching this going, I don't see anything happening. But it's going to be maybe when I get over to the darker areas, like right here over top of that watercolor pencil, you can see, hopefully you can see how it covered it up a little bit more. So, oh, there we go. Hopefully you can see that, how it's kind of really lightening up those darker areas around the letters. Like I said, it's kind of subtle because the pencil isn't perfectly opaque, and that's kind of what I like about it. It lightens it up a little bit. Yeah, so over here where the background is darker, I'm hoping it's showing up enough where you can see it, and I'm pressing pretty hard. I am getting it on top of the black ink, so if that bothers me later, I can go back and go over top of the black ink. So the white just kind of allows me to add some highlights. I could do that in shapes. I could do it around letters. Maybe I want to use it as a highlight and shade in certain areas. So anyway, so especially over here, hopefully you can see how that pops out just a little bit more. So yeah, I like using the white for that. And now I want to talk about shading, because I really like that technique with the Inktense or with the watercolor pencils, where I go around an object and I blend it out into the background. The only problem is that whenever I do that, sometimes it's not super dark. It doesn't show up really well. So I'm going to take a darker, this is kind of a burgundy color. They call it Loganberry, but it's kind of like it's like a dark reddish brownish color. And what I think Prismacolor has one called Mulberry, maybe that's what it's called. Anyway, what I can do is I can shade around, and just from practice and using these a lot, I know that this pencil is very similar to that Shiraz Inktense pencil. But anyway, so I can go around and I can shade it, so I'm pressing a little bit harder around the circle, and then shading, lightening up on my pressure as I come out away from the circle. Now over here, maybe I want to pay attention to this rectangle, maybe I don't want to shade into the rectangle, so I kind of go around it. Now the circle goes through this rectangle, so I think I'll go ahead and shade into it. But what I find is that doing this helps to really kind of neaten up some of the areas. So sometimes with the watercolor pencil, with the Inktense pencils, it's a little messy, it's a little scribbly, it's a little, maybe as I'm painting it, I get a edge that's all wonky and uneven. So this is a great way to go back and kind of smooth things out. Okay. And then up here around the word, I can kind of shade around. Okay. So anyway, so that's another way to kind of use to shade. And I mean, I don't know if you can really see the huge difference. And like the white, it's a little bit more subtle. So that's why I like to use the colored pencil now. It's a little bit more subtle. It's not super obvious, but it's a way to really create a lot of richness to a page. It really kind of fine tunes and polishes some of the things. So I kind of think about this as more of an embellishment. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit similar. So I'm going to use a similar technique of kind of going around the edge, but I only used one color. Now I want to kind of talk about and show like a little bit of mixing and blending, and that's why I have the white paper, because this is very subtle, and it's really hard to kind of see. So I'm going to use the white, and I think I'm going to I have 4 different colors that I'm going to use to mix and blend. Okay, so I've got a dark brown, they call it brown earth. I've got a kind of a reddish brown, they call it dark terracotta. I've got a lighter brown called pale brown, and then this is an ochre, like a yellow ochre. And these are colors that I use a lot. So when I do this technique, I'm going to show you one here first, and then I'll use a different set of color to do it in the book. So it's kind of the same idea. It's the idea that I can go around. So I'm starting with that darker brown. And so if I go around the shape, so I could either create one like I am now, or I can use one that I already have there. And I'll shade, so you'll actually get a better sense of how I did the circle over here. So I shade pressing harder here, and then I'm lightening up my pressure as I go out, and gradually fading it out. The same thing. So I'm doing that all the way around. So I'm just going back and forth, and we call that hatching. If I want to make it even smoother, I can come back and crisscross it, and we call that cross hatching. Now this is drawing paper that has a little bit of a tooth on it. My mixed media paper is much smoother, but I wanted to kind of show you that technique without any other thing kind of in the way, because it's can be really subtle. Okay, so I do that on all 4 sides, and I'm starting with the darker color first. Some people like to start with a lighter color, but depending on the pencil, it might blend better to start with a darker. So even I used Prismacolor for years, and if you can start with a darker color and then kind of work back toward the lighter color, and the lighter colors actually blend the pencil together. All right, so I have this sort of shadow around the square, and this is very similar to that Inktense, that watercolor pencil technique. And now I'm going to change. I'm going to use this. Actually, I'm going to use the dark terracotta, that reddish brown, and I'm just going to go right in and do the same thing. But maybe this time I'm going to work it out just a little bit further, and come back and cross hatch. And it's going to get a little bit darker. But it's gotten a little bit warmer. I don't know if you can really see that on the video. This is a bit more time consuming. So just using one color to like fix up the shading, a lot quicker. But I like to do this because it really creates a richness. Alright, so I've gotten the reddish brown around it. Now I'll switch to the pale brown. And the lighter colors will start to blend everything together. But again, I'm pressing harder near the square and then lightening up my pressure as I go around. And you can see how the shading's getting a little bit bigger as I go around. And it's really going to be this ochre that starts to blend everything together and tie it all together. So I can press pretty hard with it. So again, the reason I'm doing this is to make it a richer, more vibrant color. So if I just did one color, it works, and it works well on top of the watercolor pencil or on top of the ink tints. But using these different colors can really help blend into the page that's underneath it. But just gives me a richer color and shading around it. So I don't know how well you can see that. Hopefully you can see it pretty well. But I'm going to basically do the same thing with a different set of colors. I'm going to use my pinks and purples because I have a page that I want to work on. So if I come back here, all right, so I'm going to flip back through, and I want to go, okay, so I want to go to this page. So I've worked on this a lot, and it's getting to the point where I might be calling this resolved or finished or complete pretty soon. But I'm going to use my purples and my pinks and to really bump up some of the contrast. So I've got some purples around here. So I've got, actually I'm going to start off, this isn't even a purple, this is an indigo. So a really dark blue. So I'm going to start off with that and then move through purple and then finally get into pinks. But I'm going to go around, start off by going around this rectangle. And what I want to do is just start right at the edge and then start to shade it out. So it'll give it a blue tint because it's a dark blue, but it ties in. It's a little bit darker than the purple I have. So if I'm doing something like an ochre or I'm doing a red, I might use brown first, like a dark brown. If I'm doing purples and blues, I use this indigo, and even greens. So I don't use black. A lot of people are like, oh, well, if you're trying to create kind of shading, you want to use black. Well, black is not a very natural color. So, but if I use blue, it's going to create kind of a dark first layer. And again, I'm pressing a little bit harder near the rectangle, working out. And I have all this other stuff going on, but the nice thing about the pencil is that I'm not going to, it's not super opaque, so it's not going to cover it up completely. So it's going to let stuff show through, but it's just going to darken and really heighten what I have going on already. So now that I have the blue, let me switch to the purple. So this is a pretty dark purple called royal purple. So I'm just going to go right in on top of that blue, blend it right in. And again, I'm kind of working it out even further. And the nice thing is that it's going over top of things. It's helping tie stuff in. I'm going to go talk about that more next time. So on Wednesday morning, I'll talk more about that, of how you can tie collage in and really integrate it in different ways. But this, like I said, this kind of just goes over top of everything, but doesn't hide it. So if I was using acrylic paint, most often acrylic paint's pretty opaque, and so I end up covering a lot of work I've already done. So this way I'm not covering it completely. Yeah, it kind of maybe fades stuff out a little bit, but it doesn't cover it completely. Okay, so there's the dark purple. Now I have a lighter purple. Now sometimes I don't like these pencils because all the barrels are the same and then the color is supposed to be here. Well, this looks more like they call it bright lilac, and looks like a really light purple, but when I look down here, it's not quite that light. So you can't always trust, even with the Prismacolor, you can't really trust the color of the barrel or the painted part of the colored pencil. You really have to experiment with them and try them and get to know them and know exactly kind of like, oh, how's that going to work? So this lighter purple starting to kind of blend in. You might be going, I don't see anything happening. And that's kind of the point, is that it's very subtle. But what's happening is that it's blending the dark blue and the purple, and it's starting to tie it into the background. And that's the whole idea. What I'm trying to do is I've picked colors that are going to purposefully blend into the background and just create a richer surface around certain areas. I'm not going to cover the whole page, but this light purple really starts to kind of blend in, and I'm shading very lightly. Okay, and then I have this fuchsia, this pink color. So I have one, this is called deep fuchsia. So again, I can come back in and shade it, and that fuchsia is going to kind of just give it a little bit more of that magenta, fuchsia, pinky kind of color. Really going to make it more intense. So I don't know if you could see, like right here, how more pink it is than here. So what I find is that when you first start a page, everything seems very bold, and you put paint down and you can really see it. You put watercolor pencil down, you can really see it. But as you get to the final layers, it's just sort of like fine tuning. The effects aren't as bold, they're not as dramatic, a little bit more subtle, but it creates that richness that I like. And it's just building up layers upon layers of materials and textures and color. And that's why I like using the colored pencil sort of as like a finishing touch to pages. I mean, yeah, I can draw with it, I can use it at the beginning, of course, but using it now to really help that. And hopefully, if we look at the difference between here and over here, so this is that same purple that I had around here, but hopefully you could see how this is much richer, darker, more vibrant than this over here. And that's what I'm going for. And then the final one is this light pink. And I don't know, I just want to make sure. So again, kind of blending it in, going over top of the tracing paper that was there. And like I said, it's so subtle now, but it's just kind of heightening it. And I don't know how well it's coming through the video, but yeah, just kind of going around, shading. Now the only problem with this is that colored pencil tends to have wax in it. So I know we often think of like crayons as the waxy material, but most colored pencils, unless they say so, have wax. So even the Prismacolor. So a lot of people are like, oh, Prismacolor are like very high professional, high quality, and they are. But they have a big problem called wax bloom. So if you've ever used colored pencils and you're really layering them and you're pressing really hard and you're putting down a lot of the pigment, there's wax in there. And then what happens over time is that wax sort of works its way up to the surface of the pencil, and you may have done a colored pencil drawing or coloring page or something, and you come back and it looks real kind of frosted, like it looks like it has this like dusty film on it, and that's called wax bloom. And that's one thing that Prismacolor, they're always struggling with that. And like they have tried to create fixatives that sort of eliminate it, but it's just the nature that it's wax in these pencils. So if I'm putting down a lot of the pigment, I can have that problem later, that wax bloom. So I haven't found it so much with these pencils. Now there are some pencils like the Faber-Castell polychromes, which are like an oil-based pencil, and even Derwent now has a set, they call it their light fast, I think is what they call them. They're oil-based, and you don't have the wax bloom as much, but they're more expensive. They are oil-based. So anyway, so I have a real waxy surface is kind of what I'm getting at here. I'm probably not going to have to worry too much about the wax bloom. I probably don't have to worry about it getting kind of that haze on it, but it is real waxy, so it's going to be difficult to work on top of it. So that's why I kind of feel like right now this is sort of the end. I'm not going to do much more because I probably can't draw on top of that waxy colored pencil. Okay, but something like the texture rubbings, yeah, that's wax, but there's not as much wax, so it's a little bit easier to kind of work on top of that later and add paint and stuff. So but anyway, so that's kind of like I said, I hope you can really see the difference between here and over here, and just how this is much deeper and richer in color, and that really makes that pink frame really pop out, and it starts to create depth. So that's another thing that this does. I can really create depth and make things look like they're really popping out or going in. I can create shadows. I can create that illusion of 3 dimensions, which I'm not so worried about in something like this. So I'll probably do a similar technique where I'll go around these letters, maybe just with a single color, help them pop out. I might take some of the white, go over it, make those words pop out. But colored pencils are a great way to sort of strengthen areas, fix up wonky edges, create a lot of richness around in backgrounds and such, and also creating those textures. But again, you can color, you can create all kind of stuff with it. So anyway, that kind of wraps it up for right now as far as the colored pencil. So so it's not a material that I use all the time, and to be honest, sometimes I kind of forget about it. Sometimes I'm just like, they're in the studio. I actually had to go out to the studio and grab the colored pencil because it's not something I use a lot. I don't carry them around with me, but a good set of 24 or 36 can do your can do you pretty well. So and they're a good addition to the journal just because you can go back and fine-tune things, darken areas, fix wonky edges, and they do actually. What's interesting is a lot of the colored pencils work on top of acrylic paints if they're not too glossy. So that's another thing. If you're like, oh, but I use a lot of acrylic paints, how can I use the colored pencils? You might be able to use it on top of the acrylic paint as long as it's not too glossy. So that kind of wraps it up for another live stream session. So if you've got any questions, make sure you pop them into the comments. I'll be happy to respond and try to answer questions. If you caught part of this, it will be archived and it'll be on Facebook as well as YouTube. And don't forget, I'll be back here on Wednesday morning, same time, talking about incorporating collage. And the other thing is that I'm going to do another virtual meetup on Wednesday afternoon at 1. So I just posted about that this morning on Facebook. So if you want to be part of that, make sure that you email me. If you don't have my email, just direct message me. through Facebook or on Instagram or wherever. So I'll look through all those platforms and shoot the invitation to people who want to be part of that. So anyway, I hope you got something out of today's live stream. Like I said, join me on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and we'll get into some incorporating collage. So thanks so much for being here and tuning in, and as always, happy creating.